We have one down here at the back.
Yep. Conor McKenna from Smoke Marketing. I'm directing my question to Yvonne relating to your timeline for product development. I noticed the business case is quite early in that process and it's just ahead of a great phrase, which is the money gate. If you could just maybe talk about that, the business case, how that's developed to that stage, and also getting through the money gate, what type of hurdle is required?
Oh, that's kind of a lot of questions. We use a stage gate process, so it's like a programmed innovation. So it starts, we would have lots of ideas, into the usual funnel approach. We have to make a very strong business case at the beginning, which looks at the technical probability of achieving it, and the commercial probability of having a market success. And we use calculations for net present value and expected commercial value. So it's very numerical at the beginning. As we progress through a project, we have an opportunity to kill it at various stages. For example, as we progress, we may find that the technical probability disimproves, which changes the whole financial structure of the project. We may decide to kill it then. Or we found new markets, and that improves our probability of commercial success, which makes us kind of move ahead. But the timeline then for that project can be anything, depending. For a small project, it might be a couple of months. For a big, long-term project, a couple of years.
Great, thank you.
Just a question that it has come up a number of times, but when I'm speaking with companies, it invariably comes up as the issue of IP, and we've discussed it today. I think maybe there's a lot of confusion in companies, but certainly it's seen as a barrier. Perception is that it's a barrier, and what I'm hearing is, particularly from John and Tom there was, and Yvonne, you mentioned that Ireland was much more benign in terms of IP. So I think maybe could we just maybe elaborate a little bit on how does a company address the IP issue with the university, and what are the demands, the typical demands in an Irish situation?
They're all looking at me. Well, in terms of the collaboration that we've put together, I have to say that I would agree the universities have been very flexible in relation to the IP models that they've put in place. It's been probably a little bit easier for us in terms of that we're funding the whole research project, and therefore the ownership. And I'm looking here, Peter Conlon and John are looking at me. I have to be very careful, but we'd own the IP. Now, obviously, we'd give to the universities for teaching purposes, and they're nodding there. Thank you, thankfully. But yes, in terms of if you're funding the research and you're funding it wholly, well, then you'll own the IP. The universities will obviously want to use it for teaching purposes, and they'll also want to publish. And it's both in your advantage and to their advantage to publish the research. In terms of us, in terms of publishing it, we will make sure that there'll be a review from Fujitsu laboratories when they're doing that, just to make sure that we are protecting the IP as much as we can. But it's in both of our advantages, in both of our interests for those researchers to publish and talk at conferences, to talk about the collaboration and to talk about the research that they're doing, because we want them to advertise it, we want them to talk about it.
Tom,
yeah, just
DRT.
I'd add to what John said. We're all in the same game on the tech transfer side. We're all people that have come from industry. We all know what's needed. We know the requirements for confidentiality. It's hard to get some of the academics to know that as well, but we work hard to ensure that there's confidentiality around the IP. When we go through the licensing process, it's a bit of paperwork really to negotiate out a good deal for the company and one for the researchers so that they continue on the research. But we're not looking to make any big fortune out of it. And all of the tech transfer offices would tell you that. It is about packaging it up in a way that protects the IP for you. It is about putting patents around the IP, making it something that you can use and that nobody else will use. and that you have legal vehicles around it. So that's what the IP and licensing is about from the tech transfer perspective.
The one thing I should have added in terms of IP, background IP is quite important, and identifying what background IP both organisations or a number of organisations are going to bring to bear. It's very important that you clearly define and write that into whatever agreement, because should that background IP from a third party result in the development of your product, well, then you're going to have a licence for that. So you need to be very clear on what third party software or development or whatever it is that's going into the product that you're going to develop, who owns it, and you're going to have to get a license. So it's not just new IP, you're also aware of background IP that's already owned by different parties.
And I would say on the IP issue that it has to be said, and unfortunately this is a peculiar, when you say there's a barrier, well, what's the barrier? I mean, it's something that has to be dealt with. Somebody has to own it or it has to be shared. But I'm sure that maybe there are some solicitors here, but I think the Irish legal system does not help in the way it's structured, like the UK, the double-tiered system, solicitors, barristers. There's a few Irish companies that have very good lawyers that will really try to help, particularly a small company, but unfortunately the legal community in this country just sees universities and IP as a way to make money. I mean, that's the reality, and and it's justified by there's a government competitiveness quango that reports directly to the Taoiseach, and he said this is one of the biggest problems in Ireland. I can't remember who that, one of you might remember, but one of the biggest problems to competitiveness in Ireland is the legal community, and it has to.
That John Fingleton from the Competition Authority.
Pardon?
That John Fingleton from the Competition Authority.
Yeah. He was on Morning Ireland, and he said that out. And I mean, I just would echo that in my own. No, there's some very, very good lawyers. Usually, people that work on their own. They're not part of one of the big firms. And if you can find somebody like that, there's a lady called Shifra Flood who I've never met, but I've done some very complicated agreements with her, and they're like 3 pages, or 2 pages, and everybody's happy. Everybody understands them. That's my own personal view. I'm not saying that's Trinity's view. But
if I could come in on that, there is a new report from the government, the IPIG report, which came out in the middle of the year, and that aims to streamline and to standardise the relationship between the TTOs and industry. So there is a central CTTO office being put in place to actually drive that report. It has the agreement of government. It's intended that all research performing organisations, if I can use that term, will actually adopt a standard approach to licensing. So we would see the licensing becoming much more certain and much more streamlined, with an increasing level of standardisation over the next 3 to 4 years.
I think just to add to that, the other thing that IPIG does is it looks at due diligence around the IP as well, in terms of ensuring that the IP has quality. That's very important, as already referred to.
Just on the IP issue, because we were pre all this IP world in the universities, and the way it was dealt with was just a simple shareholding in the company and no IP agreements, but it was a fairly light touch. We own the IP. The university still owns a percentage of the company, and that's how it was dealt with.
But these days, I think a VC, I don't know if you raise money on that, but in due diligence, as you say, Tom, it's going to come up.
Yeah, who owns it? Yeah.
They want a watertight deal.
I think if I may mention as well, there is state aids issues. If the state through the universities puts up the vast majority of the funds, and if the company were to own the IP, that has state aids issues, which would be contrary to EU law. So there has to be a situation effectively where those who pay for the IP will get value for that, for what they've paid in their IP agreement. But you can't have the state paying for the IP development and somebody else owning it. That wouldn't work with EU law in terms of competition.
So particularly, I suppose, in thinking of innovation partnerships where you know, 80%, could be up to 80% funding available that will come from the state. But obviously then the agreement between the company and the university could be, you know, be some form of license and kind of exclusivity and all of that attached. But what you're saying,
and there is a fair value issue built into that, and that I think where the IPIC report deals with trying to codify that.
Okay.
If I could just add to what's already been said, it's so important that we keep it simple, because if we go the way the US universities have gone, where you have very complex legal negotiations, we won't be competitive anymore. I mean, when we're looking for cooperation with universities, we're not just looking at Ireland, we're looking globally. And Ireland at the moment is easy to do business with and to come to these kinds of agreements. It's not the case in other countries.
So what I'm hearing out of this is hopefully we're going to get some standardisation coming. I think keeping it simple is a message there. And I think the other thing that I would add is just having the community, having the education. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around what IP is and what IP demands are being made on people. So I think from an industry point of view, so I think that's very important that the message gets out there as to what are the conditions, what are the conditions that are going to be set down. Sorry.
Yeah, hi, Cormac Kelly from Innovate Out. This question is for John and Tom. Just leading on from that, speaking about international universities, I was just wondering, is in Hothouse and Trinity, is there a framework to work with other university organisations in other countries? We have a situation where we're dealing with a partner of ours in Beijing who is tied in with IP and R&D in Beijing University. And we would see that also in some of our Latin American activities. And I was just wondering if there are specialists or people in your organisations or a framework to deal with those other universities, possibly international universities, for a company looking to R&D.
Yeah, I'd say certainly for ourselves, we're involved in a number of large consortiums. And some of the consortiums, we would lead the consortium, in which case we would develop the consortium agreement that would include the intellectual property. So we have standard frameworks. The EU also provides a framework that we build on top of to create a framework that works for the partners that we would deal with. So we would have combinations of academia and businesses in multiple countries in a consortium. And we would, as the lead partner, put forward a framework for IP agreement and negotiate it out, work it out before we start the project. We've done that several times. We also do it here, even in the city here. We've done consortium agreements with 12 partners, a mix of companies that are not directly competing in the same space, obviously, but can be partners of an ecosystem. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, particularly when you talk about China. Somewhere like China, EU, within Europe, it's very well covered. And I don't know, to be honest. I think there's a lot of kind of, universities do a lot of memorandums of understanding with, about cooperation. And nearly, if you look at all the permutations, every university in Ireland is combined with some other institute in some agreement. But I don't know, and the specific, I see Richard Stokes down there. Richard, would you know something specific about collaborations, frameworks for collaborations with somewhere in China?
I mean, I think you're right, John. Every university has collaboration in one country, another, India, China, the US. There is no formal structure, and I think that is potentially an issue, because trying to reconcile the irreconcilable expectations of different industry partners and different universities is quite a challenge, and it probably can't be done. And I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to clear ground rules and having expectations pretty well aligned very early on in the dialogue. And I think there's no magic to dealing with universities. People see universities as very difficult, complex, medieval institutions. But in fact, as you said yourself earlier, most of the tech transfer offices and many of the research offices now are staffed by people whose background is entirely industrial and commercial. And I don't think you need a formal structure. There are lots of formal structures, frankly, out there, which I think are just time-wasting structures. I think people do business with people, And I think by talking to institutions with an outward-looking disposition towards getting the deal done, that's the way to go forward. And then the trick then is to identify who those institutions are. And I just wanted to take up something while I have the microphone now before it's taken from me. Anthony mentioned something about working with the university system. We're involved in one of the consortia that's working with Fujitsu. And I think it's critical to get the expectations aligned very early on. It's where things go wrong if they're not aligned. And we spoke about IP. I think the IP issue is, frankly, a distraction. I was a member of the IP group for the last 2 years. And IP is either an asset or a liability. Increasingly, it's a liability in the hands of the universities because they don't have the money to further develop an IP portfolio. So it's an asset that's exploited by a company. Where reality has to come in is, as Greg said, if the company only wants to fund a very small percentage of a fraction of the real cost, then it can't expect to get complete ownership, complete control in all fields of view. So as long as sanity prevails in the realistic commercial discussion, then deals can be done and can be done quickly. Speaking for DCU, the ad is that we do more innovation partnerships than any other university in the country. We've also done more licenses than any institution over the last 5 years. And we do that on a pragmatic basis. On day one, up front, we document the deal. We don't wait till the end of the research project to then have a fight about who gets what percentage of what. If we have that tense discussion, it's always tense. Business is a tricky situation when you're talking about money, talking about revenue sharing. But we have it, we get it over and done with, and the deals proceed. So I would say, don't ask so much about, are there more and more consortia out there that will help you sort out your problems. Just adopt a pragmatic, business-like approach to the deal, and the deal will get done.
Thanks, Richard. Other questions? The lady at the back here.
Hi, Emer Connolly from Celtic Chocolates. I just have a quick question, probably directed to the two representatives from the universities. For an SME who's looking to take a first-time approach to R&D with a defined business need, there's lots of research been done in, I don't know how many institutions all over the country. Where would you suggest they start?
Give me your business card. Seriously, actually, it's a real, I don't know a good way to figure out where the best research is being done across Ireland, because there's little nooks and crannies all over the place. Even within DIT, if I know half of what's going on in DIT, I feel I've actually achieved something. And it's the same in the universities. But there are points of contact. So myself, Richard, John, are good points of contact for somebody who's in an SME that's looking to start a business. Because we won't tell you about all the great research and the millions of euro that have been spent on the research. We'll tell you about what they've produced so far. So we'll tell you about the kinds of technologies that they've developed. And also, if you can share under an NDA the kind of problem that you're trying to solve, we might be able to spot an opportunity. And if we don't have it, we'll certainly direct you to the other guys that do have it. You know, we're all in this together, really. I mean, Ireland's very small. Okay.
Can I just say something on that?
Yeah.
We had a similar problem when we started in relation to finding, you know, the research group that aligned with what we wanted to do. And that's what I was talking about in terms of an expert group. Get a couple of people together. There'll be different people that will have a very different perspective and will know a lot about what's going on in Ireland. ISIN is a classic example. Michael Martin was very helpful to us. We brought in people from SFI, and the SFI would have contacts into the likes of John Whelan and Tom. So it's going to be identifying key people in different organisations that can help you. And then based on that, you're going to have to make a decision. If you have a very clear indication of what you want to do and the business drivers that you have, well, then it'll make it a lot easier for you to identify. The other thing that you need to consider is whether it is you want to work with a research group or whether it is you want to work with an individual researcher because of the niche type of research that you want to do. Obviously, a large research group will give you a lot more expertise. A niche researcher may give you what you want because it's specific to what you want to do. But it's a case of talking to a lot of people and then identifying who the key people are that you can identify in order to capture the research you want to do. It's not an easy way to do it, but if you do it comprehensively, you'll get the answer that you want.
I would say Google is a good place to start, genuinely, because all researchers publish or they want to outreach. And again, as Tom said, the technology transfer offices were not competitive you know, if you came to me and I could help you, I would, but otherwise, I mean, Peter Conlon is there from UCD, and my counterpart Paddy O'Boyle in DCU, and the IT side, we have a mailing list amongst ourselves. We frequently pass stuff over and back between each other.
John?
Just one comment and where to go. I mean, obviously some sources of information on who actually is doing the research would be from the thing like the Innovation Partnership Programme, from the technology centres, from the industry-led research network. So by talking to people like Declan McGee, I think he's in the room somewhere, about the Innovation Partnership, he will know who's been working with industry. So there's often a good list of people who are very practical that companies have worked with. And similarly, Martin Hussey would be able to talk about the technology centres and who's involved in those and what their strengths and weaknesses are. So I think there's a number of people in the innovation group in Enterprise Ireland who would have quite a lot of knowledge of who does what and how well they work with industry.
Thanks, John. And Declan is sitting right next to you there. Okay, other questions? Oh, no, here we go.
Hi, it's Ray O'Keefe from the Trinity UCD Innovation Academy. My question is for Anthony McCauley from Fujitsu. I noticed actually on your slides, which I thought were pretty nifty by the way, that you listed some pretty eminent foreign universities and colleges that your company is on collaboration with, but there's no Irish companies or no Irish universities that are listed. Is that just a mission mistake? Or?
No, it wasn't an omission, and that's the reason why I suppose I should have updated that, but we will be doing, that's the whole purpose of what we wanted to do here in Ireland, because we believe that, first of all, we were missing a trick. Fujitsu Labs were missing a trick in that they weren't accessing the research and development here in Ireland. They had come here about 10 years ago, and things were very different in the research arena, but in the last 5 years, in terms of the C-sets, and the new clusters that are coming together, they're very impressed in how we've got our act together and in the size of those research groups and in the international mix. And one thing that SFI have done is they've brought in, you know, world-class people, the likes of Ian Robertson, the likes of Barry Smith, the likes of Stephen Decker. And they're world-class people that have both an industry perspective and they have a research perspective. So yes, I should update that. We will be doing research. We are doing research now with Derry, and we will be doing research with other groups here in Ireland.
Very well, thank you.
Okay, we've time for one more, if there is. Lady down here in the front.
So my name is Victoria Kavanagh. I'm with I have a little startup, and so my question is, how do the universities deal with or assess inquiries from, you know, startup?
Exactly the same as we do with the large. We're interested to hear what kind of a problem, challenge you have that you think we might be able to help you with, and then we'll figure out who the appropriate researchers are that might be of interest to you. We'll get you connected with them. You can decide whether you like them or not, and whether or not they have the expertise that you need. And if that comes together and you form a project plan, then there's lots of ways to fund that project plan, and we work through based on what it is that you want to achieve, the time frames that you're trying to achieve it in, the volume of work that's involved. We'll figure out the right funding scheme for it. We'll put together the application with you and get the funding, get started. And as Richard said earlier, on the front end of that, before we put forward the project and get the funding, we'll figure out how we're going to deal with the IP, whether you want to own it fully, by all means, if you're willing to pay for it fully, or if you get an innovation voucher from Enterprise Ireland, if it's a small piece of IP, then we'll assign over the IP to you. If it's a bigger piece, then because the state is funding 80% of it, we will work out the deal, so we'll have an option worked out for you before you ever put a penny into the project.
Terrific, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And it all depends what it's all about the technology. It's research is about technology, so it depends what you want. If you want, I remember we got an innovation voucher. We get a lot of innovation voucher queries where we can't help because they just want to build a website. Remember somebody had a shoe shop in the Midlands and they wanted to build a website to sell shoes. I mean, that's great, but it's not something for, it's not,
research,
yeah. But if you know, academics love hard problems. You know, if it's something that's really difficult to do, that's good for their career. And if it's real hard technology, that's usually the best fit.
Great. Okay, folks, I'm conscious of time. We're just a little bit over, and it is breakfast. Now, one thing, before I say thank you, there are evaluation forms in the packs on each of you should have, so we'd really appreciate it if you could fill out those before you leave. I'd like to thank our speakers, Greg Treston from Enterprise Ireland, John Whelan from Trinity College, Tom Flanagan from DIT, Yvonne Trainer from Henkel, Sean Giblin from Silent Controls, and Anthony Macaulay from Fujitsu. And maybe you could put your hands together.